itching after a while. Okay, everybody, I think we're ready to get started. Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Reem, and on behalf of everyone at Better Living Dev, I'd like to welcome all of you tonight, and thank you for coming tonight as we celebrate the release of Safar by Sarah Malik. Also say hello to people on Zoom. To begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of the country we are meeting on today. We recognise their continued connection to the land and waters and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all First Nations people present today. Okay, so just a few little housekeeping things for me before we get started. Toilets are just through the door there on the right if you haven't found them already. In case of emergency, please just make your way downstairs. Drinks and snacks, please help yourself. We've got a lot of food there that I'd like to keep, so please help yourself and enjoy. If you haven't already collected your pre-order copy, you should find it over here. And I do believe at the end of the event there will be time for signing, so please make sure grab a copy. And if you're not aware, this book actually hasn't been, you can't find this book yet out in stores because publication is next week. So you guys are very, very lucky to get your hands on it tonight, so make sure that you do. Okay, so this is very special. I'm very honoured to be here today to celebrate the release of Safar. It's a beautiful book that obviously I know we're going to get into, but any books written about Muslim women are just, for me, just really incredible to be a part of. So thank you for having me here with us tonight. Sarah Malik is a Walkley Award-winning investigative journalist, author and speaker. She's the author of Safar, Muslim Women's Stories of Travel and Transformation. She's lived in Jordan, climbed Asia's highest peak, and travelled to over a dozen countries, including Japan, Turkey, Palestine, Pakistan, and India. Her first book, Desi Girl, on feminism, race, faith, and belonging, was published also in 2020 by a lot. Joining Sarah tonight, we have Farah Celjo. Farah is a television presenter, editor, and avid traveller who 99% of her time plans travel around a meal. She's passionate about food, travel, running, and telling stories. And finally tonight, we are honoured to also have Amani Haydar, who illustrated Safar. Amani is an award-winning writer, visual artist, and advocate for women's health and safety based in Western Sydney. Amani's debut memoir, The Mother Wound, was awarded the 2022 ABA Matt Mitchell Award for New Writer of the Year and the 2021 FBI Radio Sydney Music, Art and Culture Award. Amani is a former Archibald Prize finalist and a visual art practice, and with visual arts practice closely intertwined into her writing practice, as we can see tonight. Ladies, please, floor is all yours. Thank you.
Reem, everyone, the analysts, the audience, we're just taking over the world. So let's just claim it. Thank you so much for being here. It's just such a delight and honor to, I guess there's something special about, the first book was amazing, but this is even more amazing to bring together so many amazing women and to work and collaborate with them. And the amazing illustrator, Amani Haydar. Please give a round. And I feel like, often, Muslim women, there's a lot of, you feel very politicized, you feel very surveilled. There's not a lot of room to talk about joy, to talk about fun, to talk about luxury. And I think this was really a book that was an exhalation, and it was my pleasure to just be able to interview women about, their experiences and their joys and their wanderlust, So I hope that you will feel the freedom reading this that I experienced interviewing them. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to start with Farah. Now, I interviewed you, and like a lot of third culture kids, for you, your first travel experience was going back to the motherland as a teen. So you went back to Sarajevo, Bosnia, where your parents were born. And can you tell us about that experience?
I mean, it was ridiculous to probably start because my affiliation with travel began when I was 13, and we didn't have family holidays of going away, even on small trips. It was a bit of a catalyst because my father passed away quite suddenly and my mother was by herself here raising 2 kids and with no support network. And we had a very Muslim Bosnian upbringing that I really loved, but outside of the context of my home, I actually didn't know what that was and what that really meant, because things like food or things like talking in language, I could speak Bosnian fluent, but I wasn't really able to understand my kind of connection with my friends, but not in a negative way, just more like, oh, we're different, but we're kind of cool, but you're over there and I'm here. And my mum does things really differently. So when my dad passed, Mum really broke down and was like, I need to go home. And I was like, okay, what does that mean, going home? She said, well, we're gonna go back to Bosnia. And that was a first for so many reasons. First time to go to an airport, first time to sit on any aeroplane. And anyone who's been to Bosnia knows it's about a 27-hour journey. So we were really excited. My brother and I were very young and excited to go and meet all these people that we'd heard about, but had no idea what we were actually flying into. And yeah, it was a real emotional moment. I think I had this like weird teenage moment of like, what happens if we go all the way to Bosnia and these people don't like us? And what happens if they don't want to be like related to us? And my mom sort of like laughed at me like, I don't quite understand what you mean. Like she's one of 5 and, you know, on a whim, basically came to Australia on the caveat in the late 80s with, I will come here with my father, who was Bosnian, but came many decades earlier. And she said, I'll be here for 1 year and then we'll get married and then I'm going home. And then she ended up staying here for 32 years, which probably a lot of people can relate to. And yeah, so she sort of laughed it off and I was like, these people might not actually like us. Like, we're scary. It was scary, it was new, it was different. And I still remember that first moment, like coming to the airport and it was just like this chaotic whirlwind of people pulling at us and hugging us and loving us and wanting to be near us. And my brother and I just looked at us like, what on earth is going on? Who are these people that are wanting us? And also just the language, like for the first time, my mum, I felt her exhale. I could understand her a little bit more as the days progressed. It was the first time I kind of saw my mum as my mum who was young and cool and like had this whole other life I could often hear about. But yeah, there was just so many things in those first moments of traveling for me. I never really thought about it. I read about it a lot. I watched lots of movies about it. My friends did it, and I loved hearing about their stories, but I never thought about really doing it. And that's just completely changed now since that moment.
So you arrived in Gorsday,
yeah,
the village where your parents were from. With the orchards, and you've seen your mom interact and act in a completely different way to what you're used to in Australia. Tell us about Gorsday. What was it like for you when you landed and you were living in this village, which was so far away from you?
So far away, so small. Like you can literally walk the town in about 15 minutes and then you're like, cool, what am I doing for the rest of the day? You know, and people knew who I was because they had seen photos of my brother and I. And my mum is a maths professor. She like worked for 15, 20 years in that town, comes from a very established family. And so everyone knew us and I was like, who are these people? Like, I don't know, but it was a beautiful, mountainous, rich experience to be there. But I dressed differently. Like I felt comfortable, but I looked different as well because I'm like wearing, you know, circa 90s Supre clothing or like whatever brand names I could sort of stick into my bag. And I was like, this is so cool. I'm gonna be so trendy when I go over there. And that was not cool. Nobody cares about our trends. Everyone's like, why are you wearing a boob tube dress with jeans? Like, that is not a look that we wear here. And I was also the kind of cool Australian English person that was there because a few people had other relatives from Melbourne and from Sydney, and the natural, like, sort of reactionary comment was, oh, do you know Ahmad? He actually lives in Melbourne. And I was like, Melbourne and Sydney is really not that close. And we don't know any other Bosnian Australians outside of our sort of family and space. So it's really funny interacting with people like that. Yeah.
And so, I mean, how did that experience shape you're someone you love travel and you go everywhere, and how did that shape your love of travel?
It was funny. I think that first time I went to Bosnia, I left and I said to my mom, one day I'm going to live here.
Wow.
And my mom was like, why? I've just come all the way to Australia to build this new life. Like, and I was like, there's just a connection and a relaxation. And I think what I was actually saying was, I just want to be in other places and I want to understand other things and learn a lot more about what that is for me. And I mean, since that moment, I've traveled a hell of a lot. And I've been so grateful to be able to do that. That it's been a real, like, I often use Bosnia as like my base, my like safe space to go to. And I think that's what travel is for a lot of people. It's finding a comfort, like even in something new, being able to find something comfortable and safe and secure while also kind of pushing the boundaries or doing absolutely nothing and just relaxing. Like it's so many things. So I think going on that trip gave me a bit of an understanding of who my mom is, and also gave myself a bit of, I don't know, power to kind of go, oh, I can go back and look at what my mom can do. Oh, I can absolutely do that and more. You know, so it's, it's been good. Anyone who wants to go traveling with me, I'm very open to it.
Oh, that's really beautiful. And I think, you know, Amani, you know, all of this stuff is just all up our alley, right? Third culture, kid life, identity. You know, the stories of these women who, you know, you're shaped so much by, you know, these experiences of understanding, oh, I come from here, I live here, and what does that mean for me? And you did such a beautiful job of kind of conveying all that in art and in the colours of this book. Can you tell us a bit about the cover and what inspired it and how you kind of came to, you know, do this cover?
Yeah, so I did a painting at one point called Solidarity, and the theme of it is all these sort of overlapping, ambiguous faces that are quite maybe thoughtful, reflective. Sometimes they look kind of sad, sometimes they look more like calm and peaceful. And what that series of artworks represents for me is the sense of connection between women and the sense of solidarity that we build with each other when we are able to find the things that we have in common and take pride in our identities. And I didn't really have a sense of that growing up because I wasn't as aware of how gender can shape our experiences. And when I did that artwork for the first time, or worked in that sort of theme for the first time, it was really about exploring that, and something that I had begun to experience with the women around me, begun to experience with when you have those really deep and meaningful conversations with other women where you feel like you're really connected. What's that sensation? What does it mean to us? What kind of political power does that hold? So when we were talking about cover art from Safar, that was one of their, you know, they looked at some sample artworks which were along that theme, and that's what really caught their eye. And I thought, okay, well, let's play with that and make it make sort of a bespoke version for this book, because it does speak to a lot of the themes that are in the writing, but it also allows for space for some sort of symbolism to be brought in. So I used some Islamic geometry in the composition. I thought about how we can have diversity represented, because Muslim women are always represented very monolithically, and it was important to me to sort of give this feeling of endless, you know, limitless diversity, and not be didactic about it either. Just have everything there all at once. So the cover kind of came about in that sort of give and take process, which is a bit different to the internal illustrations, where it's a bit more guided by the text, guided by the stories, guided by the personalities that are present and that have been interviewed and things like that.
Yeah, I think the diversity is a really good point, because that was something we had talked about as well, and I was really adamant about, like, I felt like that is something that is not reflected in the Western literature. We are a monolith in that sphere, and anyone who knows what Muslim women are like knows it's not true, you know. And so for me, it was important to have secular women, religious women, older women, people of different racial backgrounds, African American women, First Nations women, women with disabilities, women from the global South, and it made me realize, like, what a vast world we live in, how people's experiences are so varied. And so that diversity you conveyed so beautifully in the talk. And I guess, how did you, I try to do that in the writing, convey each person's story and their uniqueness through the words and the stories. There's an amazing story of a 70-year-old African-American activist who, grew up in segregationist Alabama, the South, and she moves to Greenwich Village, which is swinging New York. And there she hears the words of Malcolm X and converts to Islam, and that transforms her life, and she becomes an activist. And that was one of the most powerful stories for me. And there's always cycles around Pakistan in a motorcycle. And so I guess, how did you do that through the words, through the pictures, conveying their essence?
Well, firstly, I love that you didn't shy away from that political dimension of travel, because I think so we often talk about our experiences ourselves as spiritual or inspiring and things like that, and sometimes we lose touch with some of those realities that exist despite that nostalgia that we have for our homeland, and despite the freedom or the joy that travel can bring. I think it's really grounding to have a sense of, okay, what does it mean to travel when there's a political context affecting that experience? How do we negotiate that? How do we feel safety in different places? So I love that about the writing itself. And I basically went one by one through the story, looked at each of the contributors and what they'd said about their travel experiences, and some of the illustrations I pull out elements of the places that they've been to, and I build those into the background. They weren't in one photograph, they're sort of a composition that's been put together creatively, where I've thought about, okay, what might this person have seen when they went to Tanzania, or what might this person have seen in this particular landscape. And others were like, I know when I did yours, I thought of the lush mountainous landscape, and you were wearing a green shirt in the photo that was supplied, and I just continued that green all around her because it sort of seemed to capture the way that I think of that landscape. So it's a very organic process, but I also wanted to capture some of those other things that are not perhaps prescribed in a brief. So there's an illustration that's inspired actually by my friend Faiz's homeland, where she went to Cape Town one time and described it to me and talked to me about the history of Cape Town and the coloured houses. So there's a landscape there that's sort of my imagined visit to that space. And I haven't travelled that much. So I've written in my own work about my visits to Lebanon, where my parents came from, and how they were very formative for me. And one was as a teenager, and one was as a child. But outside of that, there's a lot of travel that I'm yet to experience. So I was able to sort of be transported through each of those stories and use my imagination to fill in those gaps. And hopefully people enjoy that.
Oh, I love that. I definitely feel like there was a dreamy quality to your illustration, but it does feel like you're transported. So thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you.
Farah, so I guess I'm going to preface this by, I guess, a long comment again. But, a lot of this book is, I guess, the subversive quality of joy and kind of resting in relaxation and luxury when, as a person of color, or as a woman, you're often not afforded that luxury. Capitalism and racism do so much damage to us. We're always on a hamster wheel and always moving, and there's not a time to breathe, to be in the present moment. And so it's very important for me to have women who are from working class backgrounds, who don't have Western passport privilege, who are mums, and they talked about kind of resting that time away from, everyone who needs you and everyone that you have to serve. And so, you yourself, Farah, you come from, your parents come from a country that, has experienced war. You grew up with a single mom. But a lot of knowing you, you just embrace so much joy in what you do for work, in your travel, in your love for food, and all the good things, Tell me about how important joy is for you.
I feel like, anyone who knows me or gets to know me, that's kind of, my name means happiness in Arabic. So I'm kind of like, I was like, I'm pretty sure that's, it was like set in stone for me from the get-go. But I've always been who I've been, but I think after my dad passing, and then after that first travel kind of moment and sort of having to step up at a younger age, I feel like I definitely just wanted more. There was like a thirst there, and not wanting to ever be told that I couldn't do something because I was a woman or because I was Muslim or because, and you know, more often than not, I get the sort of opposite. Well, you don't wear a headscarf, so you're not a Muslim, or you've got light hair, you can't be Muslim. Like, and I'm like, well, no, says who? You know. But I think there's a lot of like breaking down those barriers, and a lot of people, even in things like the way we eat or the way we come together, there's a commonality, and food is something that's definitely come out of my travels and is something that I'm so passionate about in my work. It's given me a different lease on life, the food element when I have travel, and that's what's given me joy. Because in the intro, like that's one of the reasons I do travel is I travel to eat, you know, and I travel to experience different cultures. I recently went to Cape Town. I went to the Vocab region and learned all about Cape Malay Muslim cuisine there, and the slave trade and the impacts of that. Like, it's important to understand a country's context and be respectful of that, and go somewhere and eat and actually understand what you're eating and understand who is eating with you and why that's important. So a lot of my joy comes from learning and not having all those answers, and being able to kind of come together. And I mean, one of the stories I actually have about this, I was talking with my mum recently about the book, and she said, oh, do you remember when you first came back and you tried to replicate one of the dishes we used to make back in Bosnia? I was like, oh, I was so excited. It was so easy. My uncle threw together like 4 ingredients off the farm. It was just like capsicum, tomato, slow cooked. Not a single ounce of like herb was thrown in. There was no spice in there. It was just naturally cooked and like just simmering over the stove. Every so often, like my aunt and my uncle would come in and like everyone would individually add salt, but they would think that nobody else was adding salt. So by the end of it, everyone's like, oh, that was so good. And everyone was like, yeah, it's because I added that salt. I didn't tell anyone. But I'd be sitting outside the kitchen. I'd be watching everyone coming in and doing it. And so I tried to replicate that same dish back here in Sydney, and it tasted horrible. It was awful. And I was like, what's going on? And my mum was like, it's just a different appreciation, this idea of organic, or this idea of like farm to table. She's like, we've been doing that all our entire lives, you know, like all these buzzwords that you hear around food and industry. She's like, you know, we often watch, you know, loads of food shows. And I was like, that's nothing new. I've been doing that. I've been fermenting. This is all ingrained in history and context. So it's this idea of like, I don't know, finding the joy in understanding a culture, but also remembering that these civilizations, these people, these places existed well before you went to them. And isn't that a joyous moment to be able to go there and experience actually what people are doing, like in their day-to-day? Like, that's what I'm happy about, you know.
And kind of approaching it with humility and going somewhere to learn and understanding the history and context, and knowing, hey, this is like First Nations land, you know, what does that mean? And so, yeah, I love how that's kind of influenced your journey with food as well, because she's on the Cook Up Guys on SBS. So please watch.
I watched you on that.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug, yes. And Amani, like, you know, you, like, this is such a beautiful book with you, and it's just so much of the beauty and the freedom and the color and the joy and the lightness that I imagine you just captured it in the pictures. And, you know, your work is often very serious, but there is just so much beauty in your work as well. And so I guess, you know, in your art practice, I wanted to know how important is kind of beauty and joy to you?
I think it's very important. I think even when you're conveying a serious message or a political message, or a somber experience, it's the beauty that first speaks to the person who's encountering the artwork. And that immediate, instantaneous connection is where the dialogue begins. So for me, it's really important to have that aesthetic there, because that's what excites me. And I think I'm going to challenge you a little bit. I don't think it's beautiful because of me. I think the content is inherently filled with beauty, and I think the job of the illustrator is to tease that out a little bit and highlight it and celebrate it. And a lot of what I was thinking about while I was putting it together was that, you know, that dreamlike quality, that sense of wonder. How do you capture a sense of wonder? It's such an abstract thing, and you know, we'd been through the pandemic and travel had been put on hold, and there are so many things going on that we're confronted with and that our communities are confronted with, we don't always get to connect with that sense of wonder. So I wanted to sort of bring that out, and you brought it through the writing, and I was able to see it and then translate it onto the page. So I think within my practice, colour is about that immediate connection. It's about sparking a conversation and then telling a story. So in the same way that my writing might tell a story, there are things where topics or concepts that I feel are more effectively conveyed through images. And sometimes it's about sort of listening to intuition a little bit, you know, and thinking, okay, how do I see that in my mind's eye, and how do I make it better? Because sometimes the first idea is not really the best or the most sophisticated. So pausing a little bit. And I was saying earlier, for each, you know, for a lot of the illustrations in there that were successful, nobody sees what gets discarded along the way, and nobody sees the erasures and the ruined paper and the I spilled paint on the carpet, like all of those things going on behind the scenes. So for me, it's a very visceral process. It's not just in the mind; it's in the body, you know, which is where I think creativity emerges. So for me, it was about sitting with the stories for a little while, sitting with the images of the women, sitting with the photos that you sent through, doing my own research, understanding context, understanding what sat behind those narratives, and then just working through the images until I had a set that I was happy with.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we talk a lot about the gaze, you know, in literature and criticism, and it was really important for me to have like the white gaze and Western gaze and how that kind of shapes things, and the loving gaze that you created with the pictures. Like, I'm so proud to have that accompany these words, because I think, you know, often Muslim women of color, you are often otherized, you know, in the culture, and you know that is why I wanted to have, you know, just use Safar, like use a word that people are like, what does that mean? It's like, well, you figure it out, you know, and have those words in the book without translation, you know, so anyone who reads it, who is the audience that's intended for, feels like an immediate sense of this doesn't need to be translated. So yeah, I think that gaze really comes through. Thank you for that. And I guess one last question to both of you, you know, as you know, women who've conquered so many horizons, and a lot of this is about not just physical journeys, but just the metaphoric journey to yourself, journey in your own backyard, just the idea of, you know, even the emotional excavation that happens when you go from one place to another psychologically. So I guess, you know, what's your advice to young women, young girls who, you know, this book is designed for, who are kind of afraid but also wanting to take that next step, wanting to go on that journey for themselves in this thing called life? Farah.
Really good question.
Very existential.
Just when you thought you were safe.
As well.
I would say talk to other women first up. I think that is, and I think that's what this book is really inspiring. Wanting to cultivate a conversation around is like, everyone has their own sort of stories. It's just about asking the question. Have you traveled on your own? Where have you traveled to? What was exciting? What was nerve-wracking? What didn't you like? You know, I think the conversation point is really is something I would absolutely say, because it wasn't until I sort of went traveling on my own the first time, I like moved to the UK for a year. I sort of told my mum 2 weeks before that I was doing it, and then just went. She was really excited about that. And then went to
I had a lot of angry
very yeah, literally.
What did you tell her?
Yeah, exactly. Is she getting married? What's happening? No, and basically went over there, and I think once I started actually having that conversation of I'm going to do this, a lot more, I guess other women spoke to me about their travel experiences. It made me feel a little bit safer. And the other thing is, like, I am a planner, but I always like to leave a little room of like for spontaneity, for things to change. You might have this 5-day plan, and I'm very much like, find your comfort in that 5 days. Like you might have, I need to see all these things, do all these things, and be all these things. But find something that grounds you on that first day that makes you feel safe. I mean, for me, it's a supermarket. Anywhere I go, I have to find where the nearest supermarket is.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I'm like, I need to get my bearings. Where is there a supermarket? And that's how I feel safe. Friends of mine love a coffee shop or somewhere they can sit in some like green spaces. So it's like finding something that makes you feel comfortable and, you know, safe, you know, in that one instance. So just because you're traveling doesn't mean you can't feel comfortable as well. It doesn't all have to be you and your experiences all the time coming at you. You don't have to jump out of an aeroplane tomorrow. You know, but you might feel like that when you go traveling. Like that's what it might feel like, and it is a bit of a leap, but it can actually feel very comfortable in that first time when you're there. Sure.
Thank you, Farah. And Amani, your advice for young women who want to journey?
So, like I said earlier, I haven't travelled physically a lot or as much as I would like to, but I think some of the most transformative experiences that I've had, including internally, were about feeling that fear and then doing the thing anyway.
Yes. With
a sense of purpose and a sense of intent and a strong understanding of your own capacity for growth. And my most recent meaningful journey, I'm going to go around dropping the schools. My most recent meaningful journey was when I finished writing my own memoir last year, and we were going into, I had just finished the final round of edits, and I had that little gap where you don't know what to do with yourself, you know, because you've been writing a book and it's not out in the world yet, so you're alone, you know. I went on a retreat just outside of Sydney for women who've had a history of trauma. And I've written about this recently as an essay in a book called Admissions about this. It was a very interesting and challenging experience. There was talk about the neuroscience of trauma. There was, you know, the psychological dimension, the practical, the coping mechanisms, the yoga, breathing techniques. And then we worked our way right up to crystals and and then we had an experience that was a really deep meditation where it was guided by a woman who refers to herself as a priestess. And
when did the drugs come in? That's all I want to know.
So that's what
when did the mushrooms come?
There was 0 stimulants. This was all triggered through breath work.
Wow, amazing.
And basically putting yourself into that state as though you're falling asleep. And we know, like Islamically, that we kind of have these travel and journey experiences through our sleep. So I opened my mind to it, even though I'm kind of like a bit of a hard science person sometimes. So, you know, a bit challenging for me. But we went into this realm, and each person, we were a big group of women, and she guided us through it with drums and whatnot. And it was one of the most spiritually and psychologically healing experiences that I've ever had. And even though I was afraid and resistant and stubborn, it ended up being a wonderful experience. And there was all this symbolism and things like that to it, but I won't go into detail. But I think that idea around feel the fear and do it anyway, because that's where growth happens. Sometimes you need to have that resistance and then push against it a little bit to experience the next thing or the next bit of you, or learn something new about yourself. Yeah,
I love that. And I think that that's such a big part of the book too, that the physical is just one aspect. It's actually the emotional and spiritual journey that you make, which is the bigger journey. So, you know, that's why we also talk about pilgrimage and Hajj and, you know, this idea of like, what does it mean to be transformed, you know, in the environment of being Christian.
I know it's a weird story.
No, I'm ready for the ayahuasca. I guess we might open it up to the floor for questions, and we just check if there's any time. Anyone have any questions for us all? I'll start with questions. Oh, Alicia?
Okay. This one's for you, Sarah.
Yeah.
What was the hardest part, or like the biggest challenge in writing this book, and what was your favorite part of it?
Okay. Yeah, I think the hardest part was feeling like I wanted to do justice to, I feel like, oh my God, it's 1 billion Muslims. Like, how am I going to like represent like everything and everyone? And I can't, like, I'm just one person. There is a disclaimer that, you know, there's no act or liability taken as a result of this.
No one exists. Are you gonna start getting emails? Like, I do not see myself.
Oh my God, like I'm trying, not one person. No, because it was important for me to have that diversity, you know, because I didn't just want it to be like, you know, rich Western women or, you know, Arab South Asian women, which is just Western women. You know, I wanted it to have a real diversity in age, in disability, in, you know, people, you know, women who work in the global South, people who are children of immigrants and refugees, and especially having First Nations women and African American women in there. I think that that was really important to me because a lot of it in the book is about, you know, it's about people who don't get to see themselves reflected in Western travel narratives and don't get to see their stories, you know, or themselves, you know, as the heroines of their own story. You know? They're the sidekick in the rom-coms, or they don't exist in the rom-coms. And there is something like, sometimes I think when you are a person of color or minority, or, you know, within a lot of these, you know, structures of oppression, there is a lightness that comes from being able to just see yourself in everyday, ordinary scenarios, doing things that are just fun and joyful and pleasurable, without having this architecture of seriousness, you know. And so that was for me, having that lightness, but not ignoring like the issues in politics, like flying while Muslim, or encountering Islamophobia abroad if you're a hijabi in their real experiences. So having that, but not being defined by that, having the diversity, trying my best with that. And the favorite part of the book was definitely, I guess, you know, like growing up, like, you know, Western Sydney, Pakistani, you know, in a working class background in the 90s, it was a very white world. And, you know, I was like a big reader, so I read like, you know, all the travel essays and like the little lifestyle magazines, Jack Kerouac and Down and Out in Paris and Mohammed Assad and all these, and they're all men, like they're all white men. Thoreau, you know, and Thoreau did all this amazing stuff, like going to the wilderness and everything, but his mom and his sister brought the washing and food for him. Like, you know, like, so I wanted to write about the experiences of people who weren't in that, and I didn't see myself, so that they could feel that they could be the heroes of their own lives and do those things that I felt were impossible, to be a handhold for them. So I hope it achieves that. And yeah, you can be a brown girl Thoreau, you know, if you want. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yes. You talked about so many travel stories and transformation.
Yeah.
What's your favorite travel story?
The book?
And
Oh,
no,
mine,
your own
my travel.
personal.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it was going to Japan during cherry blossom season. Like that was like always like a dream of mine. And I remember kind of like, it's such an interesting place because there's nowhere in the world where people just stop because of flowers. You know, like they just stop everything because they're just honoring these trees and these flowers which are blooming at different rates, and this like it was just marvelous and amazing to me, like that appreciation of nature, and you have to be so present to appreciate that. And everyone knows my mind goes 1 billion miles an hour. Like I have to write 2 books a day, not just one. So it was like, oh, like you need to pause and you need to take things in and you need to stop comparing and being harsh with yourself. And because every sakura tree is like different. They all bloom at a different time. They are different colors. Some are small, some are large. Like
They're not self-conscious.
They're not self-conscious. Oh my
God,
I don't want to grow because like it's maybe it'll embarrass the other person.
They get too much space.
No, they're not
I'm here.
They just exist and they're just beautiful and they exist in their fullness and their bloom, and you enjoy that beauty because it's expressed. And so that was inspiration for me.
I'm gonna ask Farah something.
Yeah.
What was the worst country that you regret that you mentioned?
I don't want that question.
Oh,
That's a trap.
that's a trap.
Yeah.
I don't actually have a worst country. I've had experiences that have been confronting for me as a woman, predominantly as a young woman at the time. Yeah, they're not my favorite experiences. They're not something I like go back to, but I don't have a country I dislike. You know, like there's nowhere that I wouldn't go back to. And it's kind of like, I often liken it to going to a restaurant, because sometimes you go and eat somewhere and the service is slow that one night and the food is coming out a little bit later and you see everyone stressed out and they can't fit you in. And then you go again another time if you give it that chance. And then it ends up being such a great night with your friends or with the people around you. So it's like giving something else a second chance. Like, also, if you don't like something, then you just don't go.
Again.
Yeah, don't go again. There's so much out there that's good, right?
It's part of the process, right? Making mistakes, things go wrong.
And feeling your way
getting an
through
idea.
a little bit, like, you know, trying to figure out, hey, do I like this? Is this something
Do
that
I want to eat this snail?
am I making the right decision? But yeah, sometimes like the fear, like what you were saying, like throw yourself into that fear moment and you might come out the other side feeling just like, how great is that moment? And also, yeah, teach you something about yourself. What's yours?
Go together and we go.
Okay.
Oh, thanks,
We're gonna talk.
There's a reason.
Oh, okay.
There was an eye in her suit.
So look at a reason.
There is reasons, yeah.
What kind of eye?
A sheep. It was a sheep head suit. That was what was being served for dinner that night.
That was the sleep in the morning.
I need to go traveling with you.
I was there, you know.
Amani, you said that you do want to travel in the future. Did any of the stories in this book kind of inspire you to go to a particular place or a particular country?
Yeah, I don't think there's one experience in there that I wouldn't want to sort of have my own version of. I went to Morocco and I've always wanted to go to Morocco. And before I had my first baby, my husband and I were talking about going to Spain and Morocco. And then I just lost interest in talking about it and decided to get pregnant instead. And that sort of derailed that. So I'm really interested as well in the perspectives of mothers, how they travel, how you create that sense of safety and certainty when you've got small children and your sense of anxiety is so heightened. Because I know that after motherhood, I became a lot more reserved about the types of risks that I was prepared to take and trying to rebuild that. And most of the travel that I've done since has been family holiday things like Fiji. So I'm excited about when we get to that phase where I can take my kids to Lebanon, for example, because we've got a deep connection for me, but also to take them to all the places that I didn't get to go when I was little because my parents didn't see meaning in traveling anywhere other than to their homeland because they were so disconnected from it and meant a lot to them. So I think we have a privilege now where we can use travel in that leisurely way. Whereas the previous generation couldn't, it had to have a sense of purpose, you had to be able to afford it. We would split up the family, 2 people would stay behind so that the other 2 could go take turns and things like that. So I'd love to, probably go to Morocco, go around Europe, go around Middle East, Jordan.
Yes. Yeah. There's a story of Tasneem Chopra who talks about being a mum traveling, and I thought you might have chuckled at that one. And she has 3 grown children, and she's like, I want to go back to Kenya or where her parents are from. And then people said to her kind of judgmentally, what about the kids? And she's like, they're grown up. And so she packs a month of dinners, frozen dinners. And she's like, I'm going, and so that was a story that I actually loved. That was quite funny. And she's like, I'm mad when you get asked that question.
It's so true. I was in Adelaide for the Adelaide Writers Festival last year, and it was my first Writers Festival for my book. We'd just come out of the pandemic. I had such a sense of purpose around it. I went on my own, you know, figured it all out by myself. And then when I was coming back, I got a taxi, and the taxi driver was like, "So who are your kids with? Where are your children?" When I mentioned I had kids,
They're running wild in the streets. Setting fires.
With your farmer. He was so baffled.
Right, I definitely felt like I was an important inclusion. And
I had a question. I wondered if you obviously the topic of the book is around travel, Safar. I wondered if you had any other topics in the process of putting this together that you thought maybe I'll explore maybe just food, like just stories of food, or was it straight away travel? You're like, yeah, this book is going to focus on.
yeah, because so this is fourth of the series. So there's Black Girls Take the World, there's Asian Girls Are Going Places, and there's Anxious Girls Travel. So
Anxious girls.
Actual,
I know.
yeah,
I'm anxious too. I was like, that's really good.
yeah, and you know what though, like the beauty of doing Muslim women is that kind of covers all of like there's Asian women in here, there's African American women in here, there's anxious women in here. So that was the theme that I was like given by the publisher, but I felt like it became a lot deeper because, you know, because of COVID, it wasn't just strictly about travel, it was about journey. I think I wanted to be spiritual and emotional and really talk about identity and self and self-discovery, because I felt like as a third culture kid, like that, they were the things that I always thought about a lot, about how where you are impacts your sense of who you are, you know, and moving between places and what does that mean. So yeah, I guess that's how the theme was given to me, but then I kind of played around with it. Yeah. Yes. I love all those questions.
Just from your book name is Safar.
Yeah.
Is Urdu one Safar or English one Safar? So English one Safar. Can I ask one question? If for all of you, you travel a lot. What do you think? Women have same pain, same feeling, same problem. All Muslim females belong from Arab, Pakistan, India. They have same problems, same feelings, same pain.
Yeah, I mean,
Did you feel that sense of connection to people you wouldn't normally have thought, like they're so different to you, but actually underneath it all we have these same pains and longings and fears underneath like superficial differences?
yeah, short answer, yes. Like, I think we often forget that just because we're, you know, geographically so far away, that one life is better than the other, or one, and because we see it as like a holiday or a journey destination, we're like, oh, they must have it so great over there because they're living this experience. And I want to be living that experience, so it's obviously going to be better. I think everyone just finds their own space and their own context in there. There are still problems. There are still anxieties. Like, you know, speaking to, for example, my friends and to my family in Bosnia, like all of my family, you know, my mum's one of five, two of her brothers fled as refugees, and two of them decided to stay and survived. And that is quite an experience. So when I go back there, to be honest, I feel quite humbled when I go over there, because I think, wow, my problems aren't anywhere near what you guys have actually had to experience. Like those traumas, you know, everyone, it's not to take away from someone's experience, just to understand that everyone has their own journeys,
Yeah.
you know, that they sort of go through. And even with my friends would often look at me like, oh, you're out, you're free, you're doing all these things, like you must be carefree, but you also have your own life and your own battles and your own struggles and your own therapist to go to every week, you know, like you have your own things happening, you know, and it's just this idea of like, you don't know what's out there sometimes. And a lot of like my friends in Bosnia, or even, you know, my family, they don't travel a lot. They don't leave their town. They like that comfort. So they're almost like, we're happy and we're content. And I can't argue with that, because that's what their space is. But for me, I'm like, I want to know what's out there. I will come back and tell you what's out there. And if you decide that's important, then go forth and be that, you know. But yeah, there's still problems everywhere. And sometimes, yeah, you often think grass is greener, but maybe it's the better the devil you know.
I definitely feel like, you know, there's this term first world problems, but what I realized is that when you travel, like everyone does have the same fears and longings and also superficial worries that you do, you know, and our family comes from a very working class area in Pakistan, and you know, like I think that's humbling to know that people, like, I remember like my cousin was looking at his WhatsApp and someone said to him, K, like, you know, like in a really dismissive way, and he was just stewing about this WhatsApp message for like the whole day, and I'm like, that's something like I would do too. Like people like have crushes and get pissed off at each other and have the same drama that you have, the same feeling slighted by so and so because she didn't like wake up and put her goat away at the time that I needed to or whatever. So like I think that is really like humbling to know that it's universal, these experiences of loss and love and feeling like you want to just be seen by other people, and I think that is like something that I find that the more I meet people, the more I realize that our longings are really the same, just to be seen by others, and to feel like you belong. And so yeah, I do feel like we're not so different. Yeah. Maybe any other questions for you on Zoom at all?
Sarah, so most Muslim women face resistance from within our communities as well. So, they might say a woman shouldn't travel alone or wait until you're married to go abroad, whatever it may be. So, we can interview women who went through similar experiences and then change the minds of those around them, or they overcame those obstacles of traveling alone.
Yeah, like I think a lot of the women also, they did it like step by step and slowly, so often it was their first journey was going to their parents' homeland, which was pretty uncontroversial, and a lot of women traveled for like in groups for work or educational opportunities, like to learn a language, so that often was like a leeway, and yeah, like I was honest that there was not that reflection of travel stories, but also within, it wasn't the done thing, in our world, like to go somewhere by yourself, before you're married. So doing that was controversial, I have to admit, and I just did it anyway. And I think that you just have to like carve that space for yourself, and I see now that people get used to it, and I think that it opens up the space that it's not going to be the end of the world. You're not going to like become a wild woman, but even if you do, that's okay. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's just for each person, but that helps. Yeah, answer your question. Oh yes,
I have a question. Why did you keep, I guess, maybe like Sydney as your home base? Because I just came back from like 9 weeks of traveling, and I had the biggest like post-trip depression, and I swear like, I came back. I just came back being like, this place is so small. Sometimes I'm like, oh wow, it's a lot more, I don't know, classes than I expected compared to different places in the world. And you kind of, how did coming back to Sydney feel after traveling to so many places, and what's made you kind of keep this as your home base?
Oh my God, I think it was like the coffee. Medicare, like being able to drive, the beach, like just being able to go, like drive your own car, your family. There's something that I do feel like are just so beautiful about Sydney, even though it's really infuriating. But I know what you mean about you go places and you expand, and then you come back and you feel like it's just where you come back doesn't meet you where you are, and you can feel like a bit of a disjunction, and there is like that depression of like, well, who am I now, and do people see me in this? How do I relate to the world now where I am? And you're right, I think Australia is a bit like sometimes can feel very monocultural and small, like culturally.
A bit sticky. It can feel a bit sticky when you come back and like re-enter. That travel depression you were sort of talking about. Yeah, that's very real. That is a very real feeling. It can happen quite randomly. I remember a friend of mine saying to me, and she'd just been traveling for the first time, and she's like, I'm so sad being home. How long am I going to be this like affected by this? And I was like, I think it's just your environment that you sort of come back into. You've explored something different. Things are open later. There's like a cultural buzz happening. The weather's great. There's so many reasons why you'd like to travel and kind of go into these places. I sort of think, yeah, look, for me, Sydney, yeah, I mean, coffee for sure. I would say, yeah, Medicare's a big one. Family, I have to absolutely say, it's probably the main reason.
Yeah.
You know, but I think if I said to my mum tomorrow, hey, I want to go to move to Bosnia, I think she'd be like, this is a great idea. We're all moving to Bosnia. So, you know, I think, yeah, it comes with its sort of caveats. But Sydney, I mean, Sydney does have a lot of great things.
Yeah. And you know what I did when I came back, I was feeling down. I tried to be like an explorer in my own city, you know, so I went to places like, because, you know, I realized like I've not done these things because Sydney's just like my hometown. So I'm not going to climb the Harbour Bridge or do anything as dangerous again. But I just started doing them, and I think that's that. I know, right? Well, like, you know, I went to like the Indigenous Memorial site at the landing point of Captain Cook, and just kind of seeing that alternative history of like something that's commemorated by white Australia means a whole different thing for Black Australia, you know. And so trying to think differently about where you're going and kind of like embracing that traveler's mindset where you are.
Yeah, that sort of tourist in your own city sort
Yeah,
of thing. You
like
sort of
going to this
forget
restaurant,
that.
yeah, it was like neighborhood that I've not been to before, you know. But Amani, I wonder if you could answer that, because after that retreat, you just spiritually expanded, you know, and you had this transformative experience. And then you go home and you have to, like, you know, make food, make you know, dinner for the kids. Like, how do you like reconcile that, you know?
I think there are ways to continue connecting internally and to cultivate, like you said, you can cultivate in your own environment a lot of different experience. I can say everything, but you can cultivate that, and you can also synthesize that sense of happiness and joy that you experience in other places within your own environment. And I think because a lot of my work has been about Western Sydney, literature, creativity, there's so much room for adventure within those things that I don't feel restricted by my sense of place. I feel inspired by it. The main restrictions that I feel are in relation to the fact that my parents' hometown doesn't feel like a viable option for me. And that's the only place where I can see myself being at home, even though I was born here. And that makes me think a lot about what it means, like what the practical side of decolonization might mean. And having a borderless Middle East would represent that for me. And it makes me more conscious of my status here, because I grew up really buying into the idea that we can sort of earn our space and then move along, and then it's fine and you fit in and it's great. But becoming conscious of our settler status and how that relates to our parents' experiences and things like that just makes me think of this place not so much as permanent and forever for me, and that I'm not entitled to it, and that I can be a visitor, that I'm a visitor in this space too. So I know that through my writing, when I was writing about my family's history and our experiences, that's when I really became conscious of those things, and I began to interrogate what would feel like home, what alternative place would feel like home for me, and is that a viable option, and why is it viable, and how are those struggles interconnected? And being part of that is expressing that struggle and that sense of resistance is a really powerful way of connecting with other people and being transported within your communities and creating spaces for each other's stories, which are, you know, I sort of just travel through people's books and their art and, you know, things like that.
I love that.
Yeah.
Spaces are dynamic and changing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, people change the space all the time.
Yeah.
I love that. I think we have time for one more question. Was there anything on Zoom, Ray? No. Anyone else has last question? Sarah Yassine, of course. We're going with you.
So Farah, tell us about that meal that you can't forget when you were traveling.
One meal.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's many, but just tell us about one. Like, take us there.
I mean, I might actually lean into my vocab because that's my most recent travels, and that's something that I mean, I went to Cape Town. I've never been to Cape Town. My partner is from the UK, and we both live in 2 different continents. So we are sort of forced to travel to do that, and Cape Town was a sort of organic for him option. It was like he had like lived and worked there, and we went to the Bokar area, which is a predominantly Cape Malay Muslim region. It's if you look it up, it's basically like these colourful houses. That's what's sort of iconic and known as. And I met Zaini and Zaid, mother and son duo. I wanted to do a cooking class with them. And it was quite funny because I thought we were going to do a cooking class with about 10 other people. It's going to be very kind of, here are your stands, very westernized. And no, it was actually Zaid met us at this corner sort of spice shop and took us in there and pointed out all the spices that we were going to be cooking with today. So Cape Malay is a real kind of, I don't want to use the word fusion, but it's a real amalgamation of cuisines, but without the heat. It's a lot of like spice without the chili. So that was really interesting. And he basically took us back to his house, and his mum was there, and Zany started the first Cape Malay cuisine restaurant in Cape Town 30 years ago. And then it was samosas, it was bread, it was everything that you would imagine out of a family kitchen happening as part of a cooking class. And it was tactile. She was like leaning over the top of me. She was fixing up my pastry because I wasn't doing it right. They had this beautiful burner in the middle of their table that had like a tomato like sauce simmering. And they were throwing in chicken and telling me when to put the potatoes in and yelling at each other that they weren't doing it in the right order. And then we all sat down, and the four of us just had a beautiful lunch together and spoke about their stories and their struggles and why they came to Cape Town and what it means to be Cape Malay. And that is probably my most recent travel food memory, that I'm just like, there's like incredible fine dining places you can eat at, and places that like holes in the wall you just stumble upon without meaning to. But to go into someone's house in that context and cook and watch them interact as a family is kind of priceless. So, yeah.
I'm so jealous of you. The beautiful, I think it's the conversations over food, and especially in the kitchen. Thank you so much to these amazing guests.
Thank you, Sarah.
And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, everyone as well.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah.
Just to let everyone know, if you haven't purchased a book already, you can do so downstairs. So get it signed. We close at 9, so we have got time.